All right, welcome to a hallway hangout. It is May 25th, 2022. Many years from now, we'll look back on this as a game-changing hallway hangout. No, just kidding. This is just a place to casually gather and collaborate and chat about all things full sighting or whatever the hallway hangout topic is. These lovely folks have joined me. But yeah, join for as long as you want, jump out whenever. You are not trapped in this call. I really love when people kind of are present when they can be, and then also know when to bounce, because I know we're all busy people. So right now I have a list of issues, but I also like to typically start the call with any issues other folks would like to go over or topics folks would like to discuss. Generally speaking, I'm trying to have this focused on just general full sighting issues and PRs, which is a huge range of things. But if you have some specific question about 6.0, I'd rather answer that after the call, unless it has to do with full sighting. But does anyone have anything off the top that you're itching to talk about? If not, I have a whole host of issues.
The styles that's on your list already is something that really brought me here today.
The randomizer?
No, just the global styles.
Oh, the roadmap.
And the roadmap.
Yeah, cool. Let me share my screen and we'll go through this. Yeah, I totally agree. So just as I'm sure you all have noticed, wow, you can see all these lovely tabs. I don't really care. This is my life. Welcome. Matthias has opened a couple different new overview issues in preparation for 6.0 ending and also just setting vision for future stuff. I think both of these are actually, there's another one I think I included. This is my favorite thing to do. This is a life hack for all of you following, is look at both overview and tracking or just issues opened by Matthias. So you'll see these two are new as of 2 days ago. So I highly recommend checking out both, and I will include these in the notes. I'll do like a little write-up afterwards as well. But yeah, the global styles ongoing map roadmap is a new issue, and you can see it splits things between a couple different items, which is pretty neat. So it's the styles engine, which is about unifying all the different ways that styles are rendered and standardizing things. There's also the main interface, so just generally how folks are going to interact with it, including, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, draft and schedule changes, which is a big thing that's missing. I've heard from a lot of folks that they miss from the customizer. Browsing styles, so the actual, to me, this is kind of in many ways part of main interface, but then of course the good old typography and font management. Was there anything in particular here, Ed, that you were super keen on, or just generally seeing how this evolves?
Well, you know, the style switcher, the way it is right now, seems wonderfully powerful, yet at the same time, a little bit overwhelming because it changes everything. And so we had talked about that briefly in the Outreach Experiment channel, and you had brought me into a couple discussions that were happening about being able to change partial styles and being able to take part of a style, but not all of it. And I didn't know where that was. I didn't see that here, and I was wondering why not, or if it could be amplified some way.
So I think, if I'm not mistaken, you're probably talking about being able to save different style variations. So switching between them and then saving. Is that what you're talking about? Is like if you're switching, so let's say you have 4 different style variations and you're switching between them. How to
what I'm actually suggesting is I wish the style variations were broken up into the same pieces that I see here: typography, color, layout, so that somebody could say, oh, give me this typography, but these colors and this layout, and mix and match on their own without having to go, oh, I'm fully adopting this style. And the example that I brought up in the chat was the Go theme, which is very popular among my students. I work at SUNY, and part of my role is to help students build sites. In the Go theme, you know, it has, oh, here are like 5 options for typography. Here are 3 options for color. Here are 4 options for layout. And that's very intuitive that you can pull those in piecemeal. And so I wondered if that could or should be built into the system in some way, so that at least a theme developer that really wanted to, like GoDaddy with Go, could build something kind of robust out where you could do it, or other theme developers that don't wish to do that could just leave them more simple. Here are the, 4 available styles.
Yeah, from what I understand, some of what you're describing has to do with the save options. So like, see how it says providing 2 options when the user applies the style variations, like merge with current user changes, apply, or just apply them. So I think there's some modeling that's happening there, as well as around the saving flow. So one of the biggest issues right now is like when you make changes to global styles, it's not granular. So it'll just be like global styles are updated, even though you've changed your typography, your layout, you can change a bunch of stuff, and it wouldn't necessarily show that. I think it's on here that, yeah, it's like switching between saving over a style variation. But yeah, no, this is a really good point. I see some people have hands raised. So I think Tammy, did you have your hand raised first?
Nick had his hand
Nick
raised
did?
first, so he can go first.
Tammy can go first. That's fine.
No, you go first.
No, I just think that so the way I look at style variations is something that a theme author, let's say you're doing the Hatchery theme, 2022 theme, and you're saying, it's a cool way to provide a bunch of different themes within a single theme. But to your point about wanting to customize, let's say just colors or just typography, I personally think that functionality kind of already exists, but just needs to be surfaced more. So inside of the style panel, you could go into typography and change the typography of your links, your headings, your whatever. You could also do the same thing with your color palette. It's a bit more granular than say, here are 5 different color palettes to pick from. And maybe that could be built out in that interface. But I think I do think that needs to be explored a bit more. But I do see from an end user perspective how it can get a little bit overwhelming, because there's so many options in there, what you can customize and what you can't what you can customize at the block level, at the global level. It's very powerful, but it can get overwhelming quickly. So
it's a good question. How can we make it less overwhelming?
This is where I think you kind of have to decide how far you go with options, and that's a question that I don't think we have an answer, right? I have this memory, and maybe I dreamt it. It was a good dream, of iterations, and I think it was quite a long time ago, of locking sections, locking the typography in and then changing other sections. I don't know whether that was ever done, or it was just a random conversation, or it was random exploration, because honestly, this is not the first iteration of global. This has been how many years has global styles been iterated on? And I know I worked on a little bit, and other people and everything. So because of that might be it. You lock something and then you remix and kind of do stuff. That could be an option. But again, we have to go back to if you're having a foundation, giving too many options could confuse. So I think it's that question, but giving the option for people who are building things like Go and building other themes on top to have the ability to extend. And I think that's what should be in core, or what should have the ability to have a lock, but we maybe don't expose it in core. And I think that's the interesting thing, because core isn't creating a theme builder, right? It's that finite thing. So comparing it to something as extensive as that, I'm not sure you can quite or should compare it yet.
Well, yeah, but
is whether we should in the future, I guess, right? Who knows?
And I guess what I'm asking is, should the hooks be in core so that the theme could do that?
Yeah.
And maybe they are already, and I don't know that because I'm not a theme developer, but are those options available that someone could extend that theme, even though it's into what they want, even if it's not in core?
I think that's I'll plus one that I think every single bit of this should be extendable, because if this is extendable, it becomes super powerful. And the whole point is about giving a foundation that everything can be raised up from. So yeah, it should have that. Nick has his hand up again, so
no, I'm lowering again. Sorry, I didn't put it down.
I see Colin though. Do you have?
Yeah, so I wanted to sort of follow on that. So the reason that I came was actually to see if there was an overview tracker I could track here. So sort of the opposite use case of what Ed was talking about. My clients are companies, and so we're trying to lock them in but full site editing presents us with a lot of challenges. Is there a tracker for ways of managing the FSE experience where we, like you say, lock things in and stuff, and how do we sort of move that forward? Because there's too much of a free-for-all for a lot of my use cases at the moment.
I have a post for you. I'm going to cheat. What you're describing is something that's very, so like, it's interesting. We have a couple different extremes right now in the WordPress community where it's like, some people are like, FSE doesn't do enough. I need more, give me more tools, give me more options, give me more control. And then on the other side, everyone's like, whoa, wait, like, stop, curate this. You're giving too much away. Why is core doing this? Core is overstepping. Like, it's a very interesting tug right now. But the use case you're describing is very much something that there are more options for 6.0 the block locking UI. So this post actually doesn't cover, because this is back in February, doesn't cover how you can actually lock blocks within the editor itself now. But right now, to be honest, it's not probably robust enough for your needs, because you can't apply it. Like, let's say you have a group block and you have a bunch of like inner blocks inside of it. You'd have to lock every single block, and you can't also turn off editing. But I will say, for full siting, I think this post will cover a lot of what you're looking for, because you can curate things in terms of like using theme.json so that it only shows certain design tools. So maybe you want to make it so that a user can't see a design tool at all and they can't edit it at all, and only rely on the theme. Or let's say you want to have some duotone filters, but you only want certain filters that you've approved of that a user can switch from, but they can't select their own. These are all things that you can customize.
Maybe I will propose an overview in GitHub about sort of all these recipes. That seems like, because locking blocks is one piece of it, and all the various options you have within the theme.json, but even still, like, feel like there's a lot of smart people all working in parallel tracks, and it's hard to figure out the best practices for like, what are the recipes that we can use to, because there's a whole spectrum from the
I know Fabian and I've talked a lot about this too, just with like various calls I have some like agency style folks. So I think you're definitely right, like, you're not alone in this. And I'm sure I don't know what kind of overview issue you're looking for, because there is some stuff on locking. I was
looking at the overview track issues you were showing previously in GitHub of like,
oh, gotcha.
Like where are we going to, if you wanted to make this a custom theme for a corporate client, and you wanted to allow this but not allow that, like,
what would you do?
How can we make that better, easier, less tedious? If you're trying to push these themes out at a fairly rapid clip, like, how do you do that with less friction?
I have a couple follow-up questions, if that's cool.
Yeah, do it. I'm also going to stop sharing my screen because I'm basically taking notes at this point, and I want to see your all faces. This is much better. Yeah, please.
So obviously, so at WP Engine, we have a lot of agency people. So one of the things that I'm going to be spending a lot of time on between now and like 6.1 is like talking to like our agencies. What do you need, right? Kind of exactly what you're talking about. And I think that for right now, I'll be candid, I don't think block locking does enough. It really shouldn't be considered too much from an agency perspective, because even though you can lock a block, anybody can unlock it. So it's a good like check. People have to like actually unlock it to then start moving blocks. But I think that where the power really lies is with theme.json. So, well, two things. One is a question: do you even want to allow, or do you even want to encourage clients to use the site editing interface? Perhaps that's left for admins, and most people are just editing posts and pages, and they don't even touch the full site editor. Maybe that's something that, as an agency you manage, but your clients aren't encouraged to do that. But then with theme.json, it's going to get more, it is quite powerful now, but could get even more powerful where you don't want your clients to start messing with button borders and, functionality that the editor provides. You can just knock all that stuff out in theme.json. So we've been experimenting with just taking, like, for example, the button block and knocking out all the functionality except for like color and width. And even at color, just providing two colors that they can pick from. So I think theme.json right now is the most powerful way to reduce functionality within the block editor and also the site editor. But right now the site editor is wide open, right? It's anybody who has access to it can edit their full site, which could be cringy from an agency perspective. But I do think that we really need to solve the agency question, because you have one agency with thousands of clients. I mean, that's where we get adoption of this functionality. And so building more tools, expanding the block locking so that you could lock down things. So for example, imagine you gave your client access to the site editor, but you could lock down template parts for different user roles. So this of course presumes you can have different user roles editing the full site editing experience, but once you can control things at a user role level, it really opens the door to truly locking things down and preventing certain people from using stuff. So definitely a lot of work to do in that area.
Yeah, I mean, the use case that I keep coming to is that, the clients need to be able to edit the navigation menu and header.
Yep.
Right. But they should not touch that logo over there that you just spent all this time designing, so those sorts of things.
Right. So if you could imagine locking everything except the navigation, so
Exactly.
they couldn't edit the rest of it, but they could edit the navigation, then that'd be a good step in the right direction. So
as someone that works in agencies and kind of has gone from the core to agencies, I maybe have a counter experience to you, but that's because I think that block locking is hugely welcome from an agency perspective, because it kind of starts that conversation. It starts a conversation about something that's needed. A lot of agencies are having to work around or not be able to take full advantage of a lot of agencies. I'm not going to speak for every agency because that would be presumptuous. And I am not going to be presumptuous or talk for other people, but are having to work around not only WordPress, but their client systems, and they're having to work in constrained environments, and then working around something that is kind of a moving target, not only for their developers to learn, which Gutenberg is, but also for everything else, and having to deal with maybe a stack of plugins to solve some of the problems. That it would be great to either have the extension ability, which is a big part of this in core, or core just doing some things that you can then extend. If it has block locking, maybe lots doesn't happen in core, or maybe it goes a bit further, but then it can be extended. And I think that's a really good thing. And I would say theme.json, I actually have changed my opinion on that. I'm sorry. Theme.json is only useful if it works with existing tools for agencies. It is amazing and it's incredible. And I love it. And I want to hug it like a teddy bear. I think it is great. But if they have a design system that they are using and they are using on all their clients and it is not compatible with theme.json, it's completely useless to them. And it doesn't mean anything to them. And to say to them like theme.json is what we're going to, it doesn't work. So what works is having a variety of options, having exports, having a way to kind of implement, and trying to slowly offer, you know, going back to that WordPress's design system, going back to having all this kind of components and this kind of approach. That's what works. A lot are adapting, but at the moment it's really close because most agencies have had to, by there not being it in core, created their own design systems that then also work with the client design systems. And then core is coming along with its design system kind of maybe. This doesn't work. It doesn't go together. So yeah, it's a really complicated, I would love to talk more about this. It's a whole way hangout, but it is really easy to presume that theme.json is like the bee's knees. I love that phrase, where that came from, but it's such an English phrase. But it isn't for a lot of people. And it's really hard for a lot of people to change to use that rather than CSS. I have seen the most amazing CSS developer be floored by theme.json because it's such a different perspective. And that makes me so sad, because that is something that we are saying is like the way forward, and that's not okay. So that we need to like support and help with that journey as well.
I do want to note that like eventually in time, the goal is not for people to be messing with theme.json, the file, but to be building in the site editor. And there's a lot of teams working to evolve that. So yeah, right now we're in this like awkward in between teenage stage where folks are probably having to mess with theme.json too much. But to Colin's point, it's like, what could we do so that you're in the site editor and you're building something out and you can export it, and while you're in the editor also lock things up, whether that's what's shown to users in terms of design tools or, you know, the color palette. And I know there's a group of contributors who are working on, I could drop like a bunch of theme related issues if I could dig them up. But I know one of the things that's being explored is like maybe having a constant that you set that then has like a theme building mode when you're in the site editor, or maybe pursuing like a plugin you install to, you know, you're creating a theme in the site editor and you install this plugin and it exposes more or has different functionality that you can use. So there's some cool explorations there that I would stay tuned for to make it easier. So folks who, you know, maybe are CSS experts or are trying to convert a design system can have easier ways. But between Fabian and Tom, I'm not sure which of you raise your hands first. Does anyone have honor system style?
I'm pretty quick on what I say. I was just going to echo
Great.
what you said, Tammy, that I'm even in my own agency setting at the moment, trying to push towards doing these things. It seems like the kind of thing, it is the future and it's something we should look into, but the amount of uncertainty around just like, I know that just putting a theme.json in my theme that has nothing in it, just open brackets, close brackets, has consequences, and I don't know what they are. And I like to think I'm quite open-minded. I know a lot of other people will be like, oh dear God, I'm going to push that off as far as I can until I know better. And for them, a lot of the things that get discussed, they're not even going to think about it until they know at least some basic baseline level, which is a concern, I guess. It makes it difficult for me to talk about it, especially when people ask questions, because I can talk about like, oh, styling this and all of that, but then people will be like, oh, if I do it in here, what are the immediate consequences? And I can't answer that.
That's a great, I love that use case. That's a really cool, yeah, this is all really helpful. Fabian?
Yeah, I can echo both of those statements, and it is something where kind of those side effects, for example, if you specify the button color, it now is a whole lot more difficult to override the hover state of that button color. And I know that that is something that is in the works, and I want to be in the state where that is actually so much easier and where it's landed in core, but right now it just isn't yet, and so it's difficult. I wanted to also share, I added a comment in the chat about the block locking, because I just wanted to let everybody know there are ways to actually filter who sees the lock and who is able to unlock and so forth, which is quite useful also from the agency perspective, to have certain roles not be able to edit a certain piece of data and so forth. So just wanted to inform that that is there. And then on the whole, just full set editing, kind of wider picture of, especially related to theme.json, that I would love to just dive in some more and talk some more about is a ticket that I just linked, which is right now, kind of the whole spacing aspect is still something that I'm having to fight a whole lot, because essentially it is difficult to just have a fixed design system where you do all these spacing in just pure CSS and remove all of the margin and padding controls. And the margin padding controls are great because they allow you to do a whole bunch of stuff, but they also are somewhat difficult to understand and are just wide open. They essentially give you raw access to the underlying raw CSS value, which again makes it a bit more difficult in the more controlled agency setting, where you have a spacing system that is kind of fixed. Hey, we have these spacing steps, kind of small, medium, large, whatever, that are predefined, and now the burden is placed on you as the editor essentially to keep remembering, hey, is this 3 rem or 2.75 rem or whatever? And I would love to see this kind of take a direction that is similar to typography, where you have kind of t-shirt sizing, or where you as the theme author can provide a spacing scale that is the first setting, and then you can override that. And it could kind of work similar to how typography options work, where you can change whether you can disallow somebody from even being able to do the custom thing, or just, I would love some more eyes on that, because I found that thread and that idea is super useful. And it is something that I'm seeing a whole bunch where it is possible, but we're needing to essentially add our own vertical spacing settings to all blocks and extending them so that you can select that. And there are ways to work around it, but I think something like that in core would be super useful.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen so we can look at this issue. So the larger discussion is pretty vast. I actually have it open right here, which is kind of funny. I look at it from time to time. But this is a longer post I really recommend reading if you have a couple hours. It's very long. This is just me being dramatic to show. But they pulled out basically at the very bottom a couple different, there we go. So you can see these different conversations are all started. So depending upon what you're interested in, typography, spacing, color, there's something for everyone. You can basically have deeper conversations between these, which I think is pretty cool. So what we're talking about now is this specific one. So just to set the context. So basically what you're describing, just to make sure I understand it correctly, because I was trying to add it into the notes, is like, you want to be able to both be able to control it on like a global level and provide t-shirt sizing options, so people don't have to think about like, am I using 5 pixels or 10, but instead they can just have like a relative value that's reflective of the theme itself. Is that correct? Just to make it a bit of an easier, like this kind of.
Yeah, the same way that typography options work, just apply to spacing. That you can also override that within a group. Now these are other options and so forth. So it would work exactly the same as typography sizes now, just applies to margin and padding controls essentially.
Yeah, that's very cool. Looks like we have some more groups. Well, to me, these conversations are getting so vast. It's really cool. Someone raised their hand. Was it Tammy?
Yeah, I will plus one that, because the way that I've seen typography work and colors, by locking it down quite restrictively, maybe you have 2, maybe you have 3, you can be quite restrictive. That works in a client situation because they already have a style guide, and that kind of works. And generally you're really maybe crafting those patterns really quite heavily, and that's kind of what we're moving to, patterns or layouts depending on your combination that you're doing. And then everything breaks loose with the spacing because as soon as you allow the flexibility, you either lock everything down and you pretend that everyone's children and no one can touch any sweeties. But then when you do that, it means they can't do colors, they can't do anything. And it kind of takes away the editedness and the benefits that you have made these patterns and you've given them that flexibility. But because that one thing that really spacing can completely wreck, it really can, and no one means it, and an end user does not mean that. You know, that you know, an editor's going to go in and they're going to add these patterns, they're going to be super excited about their hub page and really excited, and then they're just going to, it's going to go horribly wrong. They're not going to remember that there's a 32 and a 64 and a 124 pace. They're not going to know that. You know, they're more worried about like what's their latest like review on the game they're doing, or I don't know, whatever they're focusing on, because that's what we, you know, in an agency setting, you're trying to take those decisions away from them. That's what they've come to you for. They've come to you for this amazing site that you built them. And then you're like, oh no, now you've got to worry about really tiny details, which is one of the problems. I love the way you said the teen stage. And I think that that is the problem, but we can't expose that teen stage as agencies to the clients. That's like the worst thing, right? Like we're basically having to hide the teenager and say, yeah, no, WordPress isn't a teenager at the moment. No, it's an adult. And sometimes it doesn't behave like an adult. with what we're trying to do. And I think that is like the really interesting balance, that particularly when you're trying to do some of this stuff, you're like, you know, it does things that a teenager would do, and you're having to say, no, it's fine.
Yeah, and I think some of it's going to take time to evolve. Like, I think this is I think Matthias first said this, is like full citing will make sense to different people at different times. So like, I think it's cool where some people are like, you know, they want to use it right now. And it's like, well, it may not be ready for you right now. Like if this is something where you're managing a huge site and you don't want to lock everything down and don't want to go through all this, and that's fine. But I do think all of what's being described, I think is really good use cases, and also ties in really well with content portability, which to me, if we're able to have it be easily able to switch between block themes, use different templates from different themes, use different styles from different themes, like we're going to need to have some level of consistency and standardization for that to work at all, even from like the pattern directory and stuff. So yeah, I totally agree. Nick, I see you have your.
Yeah, well, you mentioned at the beginning of this, right? We have kind of two groups of people, where we have people that want to expose less, and then there's also the side that's saying there's not enough. And I think we're striving at the same thing here in this discussion, right? Because we're talking about consistency. One of the other issues that we have is we don't have consistency for dimension control across blocks. And there's a lot of debate about, you know, what block should have certain dimensions or whatnot. But from my perspective on the always wanting more, right, is making sure that we have consistent settings across the core blocks in WordPress. And I think that that's not easier said than done. You need to be thoughtful about it, but you start to run into issues when you're designing something and you're like, okay, well, now I have these dimension controls, and then you get to a block that just doesn't have them, you know, or you start having to use like quote unquote hacks to like wrap things in groups, and then you can apply the settings that you need. So I think I'm personally excited about what we can do to improve standardization. And I know we've talked about this from 5.9 to 6, but as we go from 6 to 6.1, increasing consistency across options that we have across blocks, but then at the same time, trying to provide more controls and on like, you know, some of the agency side stuff, I think would be interesting. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. I definitely have had moments where it's like, wait, where's that option? I thought this was added in, or it's like something new will get added and people will try to find that same dimension control elsewhere and it's not there. And also I think there's something to be said for, and this is something to figure out the balance of, is prioritizing certain controls based on the block. So some you might be able to find dimensions and padding if you go into the ellipsis menu, but it's like, what are we showing at default that users are most likely going to use in the 80% of the time cases? Because we overexposing stuff also comes as a huge risk. So yeah, this is some good stuff. Didn't realize we had so many. This makes me want to run like an agency hallway hangout. I feel like Fabian might be on board with, and Tammy.
Yeah, I think it's really a really good idea, because there's a lot of, you know, talk about stress testing, you know, that's kind of what's happening at the moment. But it's also some really, I think the workarounds that the agencies are having to do at the moment are where some indications of usefulness come. At least that's been the eye-opening for me, is the workarounds. Just like, oh, okay, you have to work around that. And the presumptions of, oh, this would be easier. Theme.json is such one for me. Like, it's like, oh, it's easy. No, it's not easier.
Especially the design.
For me, it was, because I was there all the way along. So for me, it made a lot of sense. But it doesn't if you all you are doing is CSS, you are completely changing your workflow. That is something you have to really recognize. And this whole, yes, you're going to use the editor to build. For some people, yes. For a lot of agencies, no, they're not going to use it to build. And I think finding that balance between, you know, those who are still going to build this way and those who are still going to build this way, and it's interesting how it's kind of going to become. And extensibility, I think that's the thread throughout today, is one of the big keys to doing all of that, and making sure that we don't surface everything, because then it's just because then you have to turn it all off, and have enough options so that, you know, if you want to turn it on, if you want to extend it, you want to build your own solution, you just can do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I think theme.json, there's a lot of robustness that's still missing, but it is already really powerful. But I do think that having the ideas of like, I would love to know like common workflows for, I don't know, most like, do they all use Figma? Do they like, what's a common tool? And then maybe building import export. I know some folks have explored that specifically with Figma, which is kind of neat. So if someone's actually doing something in Figma, how can we export what's
Figma
there?
or XD is the big ones for agencies. And depending on geographical location, you're going to have different answers to those ones as well, which is super curious.
I'm going to share my screen real quick again, because I wanted to point out this all relates somewhat to a new label that was just created. That's basically saying like blocks adoption. So essentially it's like, what things on here obviously are not all comprehensive. These are just starting to be added. I'm actually going to ping in the outreach program this week or next. I was trying to give some time from 6.0. After 6.0, but I want to kind of get a sense of if there are any issues that come to mind that we can add this label to, because I think it's like a helpful lens when thinking about future plans for different releases of like what to focus on. Because if, for example, if we see like focus blocks adoption and then, you know, a bunch of folks say, yeah, I literally can't adopt this until like, for example, this one keeps coming up. So being able to just edit template parts rather than the full templates is a big thing that Fabian, I know you've brought up, but I think I've sent this issue to probably like 5 different people in the last 2 weeks being like, yes, I know, here's the issue. Please comment here because it'd be really helpful to hear your use case. Because it is really helpful to kind of go through and see what can be done. And you can see there's pretty good traction here. Yeah, I don't know who Corey is, but I think this was one of the people. So yeah, if you have anything that comes to mind, I did want to call that out around blocks adoption because I'm trying to grow that list that's there because I think it will help future outreach program efforts, for example. So like if we know that something is blocking adoption, we could do like calls for testing on this or hallway hangouts, like really flush some stuff out, do some explorations. So yeah, know that that's there. If you want me to add something, I have triage access and can add the label. I want to be mindful of time. Let's see, of these things, you know what, this relates probably the most, right? Yeah. This is also a somewhat new issue. I can't remember when I stumbled on this. You can see I subscribed to way too many issues. But I really like that this is being explored because I know this has come up and it's similar to like blocks. So there's one level of block options where it's like, there's inconsistency in what design tools are available for each block. And then on top of that, there's confusion between this like settings versus appearance and what's in the block toolbar versus what's in the sidebar versus, you know, what's hidden away behind 5 ellipsis menus. I'm kind of joking with that, but you get the idea. So it's like, what would it look like if you were able to have some structure separating these two, as well as I think some of the blocks, quite frankly, need to have their block toolbars a bit re-examined. I think we've kind of split things up a bit too much, and a good audit there would probably be good. But yeah, you can see different design explorations here of like, what would it be like if it was like this? And I think there's another, can't remember what this one is. But yeah, I'm curious what folks think of this because I definitely
total drive-by, but for some reason my brain is breaking with the 2 there and then the 2 there in the sidebar. I just think there's like something visually, yeah.
I agree. That's what I noticed. I haven't seen this issue before, but I reacted to having 2 different tabs. Like
here,
so.
Yeah.
Because you'd also have 2 up here. So it'd be like
that's
here.
Yeah, that's the 2 sets.
This.
2 sets of tabs.
Which I think is one of the problems we have. It was interesting you were saying about an order. I think our sidebars are becoming like the teenager, getting the teenager's wardrobe, right? Like when you try to the bedroom, you just put everything in. That we're having that problem, and it all goes back to it's amazing what we have, and all these tools are incredible. But if you can't find them or you don't know where they are logically, then they're just going to be in strange positions. And I think one of the the reactions we almost had a couple of releases ago was to hide everything. Put everything behind a menu, hide everything. And now it's almost like a counter reaction. It's like, no, surface everything, and or put it in a tab. And I think there's a balance. The showing contextually by is curiously interesting to me, because I think I don't particularly like it necessarily, but what I like is it brings back that conversation of what is a primary and secondary tool. So what needs to be by the block and what actually needs to be in the sidebar. And I think that is probably a discussion to be had for and reviewed for every single tool, which we've maybe stopped having, just to kind of affect that.
I also hadn't seen. Sorry, I also hadn't seen this issue before, but it makes me think of that exact same thing, where kind of right now I'm having difficult time thinking of what settings, and I'm sure there are actual settings that need to exist in the sidebar, but what settings should actually live there versus kind of the way that I think about this when I'm working on blocks is only the kind of, there is a certain degree of differentiation of concern, kind of what you're currently working on. And most of the stuff that is in the sidebar, kind of my goal most of the time is to not have to have the sidebar open at all for entering content and working with content, because all of those things are kind of the primary controls that either live just in line or are in the blocks toolbar. And then once you go into the mode where you want to actually edit how it looks, how it appears, kind of those visual controls, is when you can dig deeper in the sidebar. And I'm still trying to wrap, or I'm outside of the advanced settings, which are the anchor and the class names, I'm kind of trying to think of what actual settings are. You can maybe argue the focal point picker on an image, whether that's a setting, but it's also kind of visual. And I think that it is a very difficult thing of just placement of settings and all of those things.
Yeah, well, one of my favorites to like show people to get the point across is the query loop block.
Yeah, query, of course. Yes.
Because yeah, like one of the
Good
most
point.
basic actions, which is, okay, I want to change the number of posts being shown. In my mind, that would be over here. Like I always, in my head to this day, I still want to do it under filters or something. Like and then I'm like, oh, right. I need to go here. And it's like, what? Like, I don't know, like the query loop is just such a prime example for me of like how, and like this is visual. So I'm like, why would I never really switch between these. So I don't know. I find it very strange what's shown here and what's not, and like what the thought process was. I don't know what that does. Okay, I'm going to stop messing with this. Also, these need to be updated, but there's already an issue for that.
Totally agree.
Yeah. Were you going to say something else, Paul? Sorry.
No, I agree with it, because they're kind of splitting some of the settings between having it in the sidebar and in the toolbar. I was expecting that the one drop down options for post in the sidebar along with other settings. And also the visual aspect of splitting it kind of like into columns. It's kind of weird in a sense. Some of the options there in the toolbar.
Yeah. I'm guessing you're talking about, here versus someone, Fabian.
Yeah, on this discussion, I still think that one of the tools that actually did this whole kind of content versus styles versus that whole kind of paradigm, the coolest in my mind is still Keynote, the kind of presentation application, where you can kind of switch between the template editing mode, where you can switch between the kind of visual, hey, I'm changing the styles, or hey, I'm changing the settings, where it's just more overall kind of modes that you're in for the entire application that changes the context. And it's not so much just switching a tab. It really feels like you're switching context in a way, which also kind of is similar to what I'm experiencing, at least from the agency world, where it's most often different people who are working on those things, or you're in a different state of mind when you're working on the kind of, hey, now
Visual
I'm focusing on the content piece versus I'm focusing on a redesign or something like that.
This is one of the biggest maybe hurdles to like where do things naturally belong for most, where do they feel natural, and that is something probably in 6.0, we've just got some in the editor, that natural, the edit flow is, oh, it's getting so close, right? Like it's getting there. And that's a sign of maturity of the editor interface, I think. But having that conversation and that check, I think is really, really important, because until we have that, things like full site editing are going to feel really awkward, because if a simple thing like this feels awkward, then full site editing is also going to feel awkward. That's not bad, but it does require us to review that, because Keynote doesn't feel awkward. And that's not saying it's amazing, because there's some things it does wrong, right? But it doesn't feel awkward. It kind of, you can open it and you know what to do. And there's sections of the editor currently, you're like, don't quite know how to find something now. And that, yes, is maybe simpler, whatever, but that simplicity on first load, or that simplicity to get that first task complete, get that dopamine hit, that first task, woohoo, I did that thing, is really what we need to empower. And once we have that, yeah, you can build on everything. But it's that first dopamine of empowerment, I think, is really, really important to kind of get there and analyze that. It's that original thing with the editor of like, what's the primary, what's the secondary? It's I have a sidebar version of like, that's the last place I want to put something, but it feels like it's the first place a lot of things end up at the moment, because we have no other space to put them. We've run out of space because we haven't audited over here or whatever.
Yeah, especially with these like design tools coming into fruition, like we haven't even added all of them. So it's like, it's almost like a weird, well, we got to put it somewhere for right now, and then we'll go back and do it all. And it's like, well, at some point we got to, there needs to be some level of intelligence being added. Yeah, Nick?
I just was kind of curious, because we're talking kind of about like consistency and where things are laid out and whatnot. And I kind of wanted everyone's thoughts on group rows and stacks, because I find it very confusing that rows and stacks are a variation of a group block. So even though they appear as a block for a user in like the inserter, their transformation is in the sidebar as opposed to the standard block transformation in the block itself, which is very confusing. And it's almost like we're kind of treating it, my concern there is that we're block interface, right? Everything's a block, full site editing. But now we have like variations of blocks that aren't truly blocks themselves. It's kind of just a weird, it's kind of one of those weird things that kind of makes me feel nervous about the direction there.
I agree.
I just want to show like what you're exactly talking about, because I think some people don't know what the transform menu is. So if you hit this button, see where it says transform to, right now, I should update this to say, I think it is updated. Okay. I'll comment on here after this to say the stack variation also needs to be included. I'll probably just update the issue anyway. But right now you can't transform to the different variations from the transform menu. Right now it actually, well,
I think in 6.0 it was made much nicer, because when you, for example, select multiple blocks, you can quickly do that. You have this visual preview, but yeah, that switching in there still is something.
And as we move forward, and I have our conceptualizing a couple issues, is that there's going to be more reason to have more settings like on stacks and rows that wouldn't be on group. And because there are variations, that becomes more and more complicated to implement. And sometimes I question like, why, I know it's an additional quote unquote block, but having them actually be a true standalone block might actually be cleaner and simpler in the long run. Sorry to derail us. It just got me thinking about consistency. And that was something that I think is one of the weirdnesses, but they're such useful blocks that are used everywhere. It's one of those things that,
oh, that's an interesting, hopefully I captured that sentiment right, but yeah, that is, I know this is something, the transform, I agree, like we should have this. It's very confusing that it's not there, and it's not necessarily obvious to folks that that's where to switch. Also, just because what's this called, where it was shifting, see how it shifts there between these? This is noted. I just want to make sure this is a known thing to fix.
We've had to jump through so many hoops. So you can see like the row block doesn't have the layout specification, or if you click on group, it has if you click on the normal group, it has the whole like layout inherit default thing. And then when you switch to rows,
Our favorite setting.
Exactly. But I mean, if these were individual blocks, it'd be much easier to manage. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think where we have these icons, this is where I think the danger of assuming people are going to know what they mean. Because I remember when I first saw this, I was like, cute icons. And just like where you have stack and where the things mean, and then they mean different things. It doesn't mean anything. And I totally like less words, because words hard in my brain, but it's really difficult when we go to that much iconography at the side for something as complex as that to convey that across. And it kind of looks, and I will just say that it looked a little bit like something hadn't loaded the first time for me, because I was just like, is there like a icon missing or something like that? Yeah, because of the shapes, because I didn't kind of understand what it meant. But I think it's just having that comprehension, having that understanding of what that means as well.
And I don't think anybody's going to know what a stack is versus a group, because visually they look the same unless you actually know what's going on. So,
and then there's the whole rows versus columns that kind of make similar things.
and that's my argument. Yeah. And if they were truly separate blocks, they could be, I don't know, to insert them, I don't know.
It's also tough because if you got rid of them, you wouldn't be able to switch. I do like that I can switch between them here, because they are, it's like, it's just such a strange trade-off.
It's a slippery slope that I think we should analyze as we go to 6.1. It's kind of the same thing where we have block styles, and how some block styles are just CSS classes, but when you go to buttons, the block style actually manipulates the attributes, which is interesting. So there's like things start starting to bleed into other things. So
yeah, I agree. And I think also tied into all of this is just like how easy they are to use in terms of like setting things up. Like Ed, in your video, you had a great example of using row blocks and trying to just have like very basic layouts, and it was so cumbersome to use and to figure out. So even if we are offering these options, it's like, how do we make these tools clear as to what's happening? All right, I'm going to stop sharing. I think we're going to wrap, because I did not realize how much time had passed. And as expected, we hardly covered the issues, which is amazing. I love when this happens, because things naturally come up. Thank you all so much for joining. I will probably hold one again next week, and I'll announce it in the outreach channel as well. If there's anything you all want to talk about coming up the next like a month or so, just ping me or ping in the channel, and we can see what we can do. Yeah, thanks so much for joining and for hanging out.
Yeah,
I will let you all run. Bye, everyone.
See you.